Right. So what we have discussed in the last session about, I think, data uh, table and all that, right? So I think that's what we have discussed. Am I right? Data models and all that. Am I right? Priya?
So we were checking on modifying the policy center interface.
Right. So modifying the policy center interfaces. Yeah. Yeah. That's what, right. So we are discussing on. Mm, Policy center modifications. Yes, we did. Yes. Yeah, we did. Yeah. Policy center modifications we have done with. Next, we need to know about different types of application environments. Usually, first of all, let me explain this. Then I'll get into the next one. So when it comes to the Guidewire application environments, which normally will be classified into two different environments will be there. Because whenever we use this application, we have two different environments. The first one is a development environment and second is a production environment. So development environment majorly includes different servers, at the same time databases. All these things will be included in it. At the same time, even development environment majorly focusing on the repositories to maintain, especially whenever we are writing down the says we are writing down the code, right? So goes to programming code, as I told you, right? So whatever the code we are writing for customizing the applications, right? So at the same time, the kind of directories which are involved in what are the different directories for application to configure. At the same time, the kind of files as well as modifying of the files, right? So all these things are comes under the development environment. So development environment majorly focusing on application development. Means application development means application is existed and whatever the modifications are we doing depends on the organizational business goals, etc. This configuration areas, this is where generally the production and development environment come into picture. But whereas when it comes to the production environment, nothing but when we are deploying the application at the client location or something like production environment is required.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever we are working on this production environment, when there is any deployment we are making, because normally we do the deployment at the client locations, you need to know, right? So we do the deployment in the client environment. So whenever we are working on this client environment, first of all, we have to create applications like different applications we have, bar files or ER files, all that. At the same time, once the application is created, the next thing is to shut down the production server, because when we are deploying the application, normally we don't deploy directly on the production server, because of course we are making any changes in the deployment, especially deployment procedure steps we have to write, means whatever the different DLL files which are included in the project, right? So different DLL files will be used. At the same time, we have to make this database connectivity, whatever the databases are we using. Let's say, for example, because Gosu is something more or less like object-oriented programming in Java. Because when there are any configuration we do, there are different JDBC connectivities we use. Something like thin driver, type 1 driver, type 2 driver, right? So these are all different database connectivity we normally we use. So whenever there are some changes are we making, deploying any changes and all in the production server or the environment, we should create an application. At the same time, the changes we are making in the production server, hence it is always important for us to uh, shut down the production server. At the same time, we need to remove the old policy instances on the production application server, because sometimes once the application is developed, once the application we have completed, whenever we are going for production of deployment, right? So deploying the production environment and all, there will be the old data which will be existed, right? We know that, right? So old data will be there. So that old data which is located in the policy center instance, that will be removed from the existing application. What is that we do? The next deployment file we generate, right? We connect the deployment file and we execute the deployment file. If you want to deploy the application, there are deployment steps, as I told you. Make sure proper DLL files is connected or not, right? So proper database connectivity was done or not. So all these things we have to do. Followed by this, we need to restart the production server. So these are the two different environments will be there, especially whenever we are working on the application front, right? In Guidewire application front. And these are the two environments we have. One is development environment, majorly focusing on the development of the application. At the same time, the second about production environment. So when it comes to the production environment, it's not only the steps, whatever I have told you. We need to handle different integrations, something like SOAP, right? So because there are two different APIs we have, because integrations are essentially important. So generally, when it comes to the API part, application programming interfaces, normally we have two APIs will be there. One is about SOAP API and second is about RESTful, right? So these are the two things we have. So SOAP API is what generally we use here, because RESTful API also we are using in the organizational level nowadays, but not in context to the Guidewire application, I'm saying. In reference to the context to the Guideware application, we use SOAP protocol. SOAP is a protocol we use, which is called Simple Object Access Protocol. So this is what generally SOAP stands for. Means detailed form of SOAP. SOAP stands for Simple Object Protocol. SOAP protocols will be there. At the same time, RESTful protocols will also be there, where it majorly accesses the different clients like web clients and all everything. At the same time, whatever the SOAP messaging request and all everything, which are essentially required for us to manage these policy information services, at the same time generating the web pages, right? So all these things will be done under this production environment, because once the development done, then this next this productions and all everything is what one has to do whenever we are working on this. Is it clear to you, Priya? Following?
Okay.
Priya, are you following?
Yeah.
Right. So these are the different applications which normally we use when we are working on this uh, Guidewire application, whenever we are working on it. At the same time, one more point to be understood here is to generate data and as well as security dictionaries is also required, because apart from applications, in continuation to that, especially whenever we want to do configurations. So next is about regenerating the data and security dictionaries, because whatever the different uh, mm, what are the different dictionary tables we have, because whenever we create the database, we create database tables, you know that, right? Either it can be of uh, any uh, any database server and all, we create different data tables. So whenever we are creating data tables, we used to create some data dictionaries here, where here we need to mention about the method of policy center, as well as the kind of security dictionaries, everything will be included. These are majorly used for us to this, because these data dictionaries I'm talking about. This data dictionary is majorly useful for us to um, understand the security dictionaries, and as well as the application guidelines, whatever are required for us to follow when we are working on the GOSU programming. Because end of the day, whatever the programming we write, usually we use this. So whenever we are making any changes and all everything, so this aspect which we have to be known with. This is where generally we need to understand about regenerating of data and security dictionaries, all that. After that, we need to generate data dictionaries and all everything on two different formats. One is about HTML format we use. At the same time, XML format will also be used. So, and this is where generally I'm talking about file formats. I mean to say these are all the file formats we use. Either it can be HTML formats, or at the same time XML formats will be used here. So these are the different application environments, especially when we are working on the file formats and all everything. So HTML, HTML and as well as XML are the file formats which normally we use. Understood? Clear, Priya? Understood or not?
Yeah.
Are you following?
Yeah.
You're following, Priya?
Yeah. My audio is not clear. Yeah.
Oh, okay, right. So these are the different file formats which normally we need to work on. At the same time, application configure parameters will also be there, because whenever we are working on these applications, especially these configuration parameters will also be taking into consideration, which majorly designates different configuration parameters, whatever is required. At the same time, whatever the configuration parameters which are required must be mentioned over the parameter descriptions. All these things is what generally we need to work whenever we are working on the application configuration parameters, all that. Now, if you want to access this configuration parameters, especially in GOSU coding, especially whenever we are writing the GOSU code, generally there is a syntax which normally one has to be followed. We have to know about the different syntaxes here. Let me open this 1 minute. Just a minute. I'll write down the syntax here. Okay. Can you see this paint?
Yeah, I can see.
Yeah, right. So you can see this paint, right? You can see this paint, right?
Yes.
Right. So syntax, I'm going to write the syntax. You can note down this also, because some technicality is, I don't say that being a BA we do that, but basic syntaxes is essentially required for us to learn and know, right? So syntax to access and configure parameter while we are writing GOSU code as follows. Okay, syntax we need to know. Whatever the syntax and all everything is what we need to know. So whenever we are going to write the syntax and all, normally the application whatever we use, which is called Guidewire, right? So guidewire.api, because I'll write down it and I'll explain you the syntax to you first. Let me write down here. GW.API dot system dot PL config parameters, right? So these are the two different syntaxes which normally we write, right? So if you want to access and configure parameters when we are writing the Gosu code, these are the two syntaxes we have to write down. Let me explain you about these two syntaxes first. So whenever we are writing down the syntax, it is always important for us to use the kind of application we are working on. Guidewire is what generally the application we are using. But if you want to access and configure the parameters and all, we need to create APIs, because if you remember in the earlier sessions, I have explained you about APIs, right? So what is API, right? So application programming interface means if you want to communicate, if you want to develop a communication between two different applications, there are APIs which we have to write, right? So this is what generally API stands for. So API we have to write down. Next, when this API is being connected, this API is connecting to the system, whatever the systems we have and all. So that system is what generally we need to connect. Now, this PC configuration parameters means policy center configuration parameters. Because policy center application is what we are integrating. So whenever we are working on policy center, policy center we are using on this. When we are writing down the code, we have to consider guideware.api.system.policy center config parameters. This is what we call it as PC parameters. At the same time, another syntax of Guideware, which is API system.pl configuration parameters. PL configuration parameters, nothing but policy libraries, because we need to create multiple libraries when we want to execute any of the project or something like that. So that is the reason why whenever we are working on the policy center, even we have to create different policy center libraries and all, everything will also be used here. So that these are the two different syntaxes which normally we need to use when we are working on this. When we want to configure and access the parameters in Gosu and all everything, these are the two syntaxes we have to write. These two syntaxes technical people will write, because being a business analyst, to be clear with you, we are not going to write the syntaxes, but the understanding over the syntaxes is essentially important for BA, because API for that, a SOAP is what generally we are using in Guideware, because SOAP protocol is being used for API, especially SOAP API is what we are using on. But whenever we are working on SOAP API,
first one is policy center. What is the second one? PL?
Policy libraries.
Policy. Okay.
Policy center configuration parameters is the first syntax we need to write. After policy center configurations we have written, the next is policy library configuration parameters. So because policy center configuration we do, but if you want to do some configuration and all, there are different libraries will be there, right? So for example, if you write programming, there are Java libraries or something like that, right? Unless until if you don't have libraries to install with, this coding or project integrations or project deployments won't happen. So hence it is essentially important, not only policy center configuration parameters, but also policy center, policy libraries configuration parameters should also be considered. The reason why these two idea or the syntax is essentially needed for a business analyst. It doesn't mean that being a BA will be writing, but knowing about these policy center parameters are the one which normally we will be knowing when we are working on these applications, all that. Is it clear, Priya? Understood?
Yep.
Right? So these are the different parameters we need to consider when we are working on these applications. At the same time, whenever we are working on these applications, it is essentially important for us to understand about whatever the different parameter types we have, because different parameters we have taken, right? So different business rule parameters we have to be taken, right? So batch process parameters, right? So different parameters will be considered here, account parameters, all that. So the parameters will be as follows. There are different parameters. Let me write down here. So when we are talking about these parameters, as follows, right? So when we are writing down the parameters and all that, so different parameters will be written. So the first one about account parameters. First one is called account parameters. Account parameters majorly focusing on the approval of the activities, whatever the configurations we are doing, whatever the configuration settings are we doing on, working on the configuration parameters. All these things are comes under account parameters. So once after account parameter, the next is archive parameters. The second one is called archive parameters. Archive parameters majorly focusing on the configuration parameter area. Whatever the configurations are we going to do, this configuration parameters wherein we need to see like configuration parameters. At the same time, policy terminologies, whatever we use here, or else the kind of application guidelines, whatever we normally followed, right? All these things are comes under the archive parameters. So once the archive parameters is done, the next one, so the next parameter is about assignment parameters. So next is called assignment parameters. Assignment parameters majorly focusing on the configuration.xml files, whatever we use here, wherein relatively these are all important for us to work with configuration parameters and all. So whatever the assignments we are providing, whatever the assignments assignments means whatever the tasks we are updating. I mean to say in that context, assignment means tasks, what is that we are going to update. All these things are comes under assignment parameters, all that. So once assignment parameters, the next is batch process parameters. Right. So the next is next one about batch process parameters. Batch process parameters majorly focusing on the related batch processings, whatever we use, because whenever we are writing down the code, there are different batch files we use. So not only library files, even batch files we have to see. Because if you are missing batch files and all, execution of the application won't be possible because it is connecting to the database connectivity. It won't be possible. Hence, it is always important for us to know about the batch process parameters also. At the same time, we need to consider this. Yeah, we need to consider this business calendar parameters also, because business calendar parameters giving you the business calendar in terms of the work line itself is concerned, because working days. Business calendar business calendar parameters focusing on the working days, because application will be performed, application will be used by the end users, by the team members, will be used by the team members in the working days, not in the holidays. So business calendar, they have to write either it is from Monday to Friday. Of course, Saturday, Sunday, weekly, 5 days it will be. At the same time, if there are any holidays, any government holidays or something like that, has to be updated. This is where generally the business calendar parameters and all everything will be considered.
So who will be doing setting up these parameters? The BA or the technical people?
No,
They will.
technical team will create these parameters, because if you want to create a parameters and all, you need to do changes in that coding part. We have to do the coding. But in what way, being a business analyst, it is required, because whenever these configurations will do, these configurations, end of the day, responsibility, especially to the business team, because not for the technical team, business team responsibility, being a BA, we are doing it. Why? Because We are the one who is going to define the business rules. Understood, Priya? Priya, are you following? Right? We are the one who is going to create business rules for the
Yeah.
for this configurations and all everything. So that is the reason why, being a business analyst, we must be knowing about syntaxes followed by different parameters, whatever we use, especially when they are doing the configurations and all. Because if they want to do configurations, they have to make some changes in the coding itself. They have to make some changes in the coding. But end of the day, different parameters and all everything are required, because business rules defining the business rules will be done by the BA itself, not by the technical team, right? Because if any business calendar or at the same time business rules, right? So these inputs have to be given, because if you want to mention the parameters, like for example, and I'm talking about business calendar, right? Business calendar parameters, who will give you the requirements? These requirements will be given by the BA. Means business calendar parameters means working days. For example, working days will be from Monday to Friday. Okay. Saturday, Sunday are the holidays. At the same time, there are some national or government holidays were considered. Right. So who will be giving you these inputs? For example, business rules. That organization to organization, these business rules will vary. Who will create these business rules, and all these business rules will be created by the business analyst. So relating to these parameters, even though implementation will be done by the developers, whatever the requirements in reference to these will be given by the BA. That is the reason why learning of all these things are essential important for any business analyst here.
Yeah.
Is it clear to you, Priya?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So we are not the one who is going to do the coding. Again, I'm repeating. But
Yeah.
these parameter informations will be given by the BA. As I told you, right? Business rules. What are those business rules? Technical people doesn't have any awareness, don't have any awareness. Being a business analyst, we have to provide. Even business calendar also, right? So what are the business working days and all everything? So that calendar will be given by us. So these are the different parameters we have, like cache parameters. At the same time, cluster parameters will be there, right? So different parameters and all everything will be used. Cache and just cache files will be there, right? Cache files, and as well as at the same time cluster files will also be included in it. So let me write it. Cache parameters at the same time cluster parameters, right? So these are the different parameters. Being a business analyst, we must be knowing. So whatever the necessary changes in the configuration when we are working on the Guidewire application, whatever the necessary changes to be made, that will be done by the technical team accordingly. And whatever the necessary changes to be made in the coding, all these things will be done by the business analysting here.
Okay.
So this is how generally this parameters and as well as syntaxes and all everything will be worked for. And this is what, being a business analyst, we must be good and we must be familiar with. Clear, Priya? Understood?
Yep. Yeah.
Right. So this is what about syntaxes, right? So this